Good evening, Hex entrepreneurs, and welcome to episode 48 of Two Turns Ahead, which we are calling Rubies, Aplenty. It is Friday, February 20th. Tonight we discuss lessons from the Ruby Cup, the evolving meta, how this affects HexTechs, and then we draft a pack. Our second co-host is the genial and gamesome goody two-shoes Nicholas Pedrasky, who is better known throughout the community as Penta Chills. Penta, tell us about your latest adventures in Combo Land.
Well, as a personal sign of assurance that I know how card games work, I found King Gabriel in the Proving Grounds. He challenged me to a match. I picked the worst and weirdest combo deck that I had available to me, and I made an Azurfate Sorceress with the direct damage gem cost 1, and then I played Zoltog, resulting in me defeating the king infinitely, taking him from 47 health to 0, which he made me play out because that's the kind of person he is. Whilst I was on 5 or so health and surely dead on the next turn. Felt good.
I'm sure it felt good from his perspective as well.
You seem to enjoy it.
Our third co-host is the crowd-pleasing Matt Miller, MMO designer and deck of many things. Matt, can you tell us about the latest article that you just recently published on 5 Shards?
Sure. I've been playing a bunch of the arena on the test server, and one of the things I noticed was that there was some sort of a synergy with the arena rules that each of the champions have, or most of the champions have, that you could possibly build a deck that took advantage of as many of these different rules as possible. And as a matter of fact, there already was a deck out there that took advantage of a bunch of these rules, and that was Jank Feast. And so I kind of tuned Jank Feast a little bit and wrote an article about how to take advantage of the arena rules that the things are throwing at you. And of course, since the arena is still basically an alpha, it could all change by the time the arena comes out, and I'll have to rewrite the article completely.
Excellent. I was just double-checking your deck lists over here because a lot of people have been playing what you're calling Jank Feast, which I thought you didn't like that name, but we'll go with it for now.
Oh, sorry. Well, the Salt Shaker. But you can't really make the AI salty, so he just is like, whatever, you beat me again with Jankbot.
Well, I know you can make one of Dwarves really salty, that all he does is goes in perpetual loop of trying to activate his construction plans, at least in the older build.
Not anymore.
Yeah. Before, he would troll you forever.
There was actually a unannounced, the test server was open for a short little period here. Today's Friday, so Thursday evening until Friday morning.
Oh, it's closed again?
I believe it's closed again right now. I haven't really checked it, but a lot of stuff was fixed, a lot of graphics were updated. There was some interesting... I'm not going to spoil it, because Data Dragon didn't like that it was spoiled so early, but there's an interesting draft type coming to the test server specifically, he said. It won't ever be a live thing, I can't imagine, but it exists. Be prepared for something that I'm not telling you what it is. Woo!
I'm sure they can find out if they go to the forums or Reddit, but we have...
I don't even think it's on Reddit. No? Now that you mentioned that, I don't think anyone on Reddit mentioned it.
It is now.
And yes, on this post specifically, I imagine that's going to be the first post now. So let's go ahead and go to our first topic, which we are having a Constructed Field podcast, because a lot of Constructed has been happening the last couple of weeks, and will continue to do so.
We should talk a little bit about Sealed, because Sealed is happening today.
Sure. So we have the VIP Sealed.
It actually happened 3 days ago when the time they hear this.
The VIP Sealed weekend is happening as we're recording this podcast. We're in the middle of the second tournament right now. I was able to play in the one this morning, and thankfully was able to fill out my playset by having a nice 4-0 with a just standard humans deck that kind of also has Zidu in it that helps occasionally. Have either of you been able to play Sealed yet?
No, I have not played in any of the Sealed tournaments yet.
When will you be playing?
Tomorrow, probably the 11 a.m. tournament, but I'll get into the 6 p.m. one if I can't, because there's actually nothing going on tomorrow for once, which is kind of exciting.
We should put on our notes that we should make a episode 51 about Sealed strategy, because that should be before the next VIP Sealed tournament. Yeah. And it's something that we haven't really explicitly talked about.
It'll be considerably before the VIP tournament.
7 weeks before.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
Because the next one will be constructed again.
So sometime between episode 51 and 56, we will have a sealed episode.
Yeah.
All right. So is there anything we should talk about sealed, or just mention that's happening?
Well, I mean, it's happening. I suppose there's not a lot that we could just offhandedly talk about for sealed strategy that we haven't mentioned in the past, but we could come up with, like, lists in the future. This is all stuff we would talk about afterwards. But yeah, look forward to the sealed episode in the future.
Someone's going to call us out on that on episode 51. It's like, you guys don't talk about sealed at all. So, then to constructed, which the first thing we should talk about is one of us was fortunate enough to be able to play in the Ruby Cup, and that is Matt Miller. And he came here to offer a apology, I recall, from the Skype chat, because we hyped up the deck so much, and none of the people from our team actually top 8'd with this deck. So Matt, tell us about everything that's happened with the deck you're playing.
Sure. So yeah, you guys, last week, G Prime was on the podcast and he talked about the Dr. Citadel deck, which was a deck, that he played, I played, and at least 2 other people played, on our team. I think there were a couple of us that did 5 and 3 with it, which is, decent. Getting more wins than losses is always a sign of a deck that has some merit. But of course, it didn't top 8. You're right. And, which is sad. And, we looked at the end and we're like, what happened? Why didn't we top 8? And it was just, there was a lot of weird off the wall decks, especially in those early rounds that, we didn't quite test against. We didn't really, think that anyone would bring this to the table, and so we didn't test against. So, especially my game 1, which I lost, was against a Blood Diamond control deck, and he had Subtle Striker, which really hindered my ability to kind of cycle troops out of my graveyard with banks, and Cerebral Domination made me super sad, and I just couldn't. I had to use all my resources on my turn for my Soul Marble, for the Living Totem, everything. There was no reaction possible from me until I finally got an Exile, and I was able to. And by that time, he had Drew's Walker out, and I was like, well, I have to exile that. And then he immediately played another Exile on my Exile, got his Drew's Walker back, and I started off the tournament 0-1. So it was a little bit of.
Did he play Dimmed?
What's that? Yes, he played Dimmed. Absolutely.
Okay, and Subtle Striker. You have tons of removal that applies to the Striker, but I guess you're also fending off against other threats.
Right. Yeah. I never drew a Meek against him. All my games are highlighted on my Twitch channel, which is Twitch TV/Deck of Many Things. So if you want to go back and watch me lose, you can there.
We did enough of that on the featured stream.
Yeah, we'll get to that one. So game 2, I played against Pablo, who was playing a Gorefeast deck, and this was a deck that we had practiced a lot against, and
mostly favorable. We thought it was,
and it was very favorable. It was very favorable for me. I didn't lose at all in the day against it. Game 1, I got I used Rutherford Banks' power on a Brawler that was in my graveyard to put him directly into play, give me 3 extra resources, and play a Citadel of Adamant. And then game 2, I got out 2 Living Totems, and I had Soul Armaments on it, and so there was pretty much nothing he could do to 2 strong totems out there, life draining him. So then I finished that, and I was 1-1, so I was feeling pretty good. Game 3, I played against Nemega. He also had a Gorefeast deck. Of course, game 1, turn 2 Angel for me, and then I win the race, and it really was a race. I got a well-timed Crackling Bolt at the end, because he was pounding me, and I was just kind of relying on the Angel and a couple other troops to do some damage. And then, game 2, I had Soul Armaments in play, and then, but he still had a ton of troops out there. I had to Heat Wave in order to save myself. Wiped out my board as well. I'm pretty sure, if I recall correctly. Anyway, I had to Banks back an Angel, but he was top decking by that point, so I was 2-1 after that game. And then game 4, my feature match. I'm on the 5 Shards stream.
Pressure's on.
The pressure is on.
It's time to make the most educated well-informed decisions that you can.
Absolutely.
Unrelated, you did do an article about mulligans recently.
Yes, okay. Absolutely.
Okay, I was just curious.
I did absolutely make an
article
about mulligans.
And what did you address in that article?
I addressed when you should mulligan and when you should not mulligan.
Perfect. All right, now back to your story.
Yes. So in game one, he's playing. I was playing against Cliff, he was playing a Sapphire Wild charge-based deck, and I really wasn't sure what he was playing when we started. This is one of those decks we hadn't tested against at all. But he did play a Talisman of Vitae very early, and our testing group had some theories about, hey, if you play Talisman and Doppelgadget, the Doppelgadget can copy the Talisman every turn and use its one-shot ability for charges every turn. So as soon as that hit the board, I knew I had to exile it. So I did. I got the upper hand with Zakir and hit 3 Fire Servants in a row, and I won game one handily. And
What's Fire Servant do?
Fire Servant is the 4/1 Swift Strike troop with speed. Yeah. And when it dies, it deals 4 damage to a target. When it leaves play. Sorry. When it does 4 damage to a target of troop or champion. So it's potentially 8 damage. But 3 of them in a row, he couldn't do anything about. So game 2, I get a hand, and, you know, hindsight being 20/20, I shouldn't have kept it. But I had, of the 7 cards in my hand, I had 1 diamond and 5 cards that were all playable with just 1 more ruby. I had 2 brawlers and a bunch of 2-cost diamond cards as well. It was probably a soul marble and living totems. And I get a turn 2 angel, which was fantastic because I played 1 diamond on my first turn, and then I failed to draw any shard, any shard for the next half a dozen turns. And that was, you know, it was quite embarrassing. I was like, all I needed was 1 more shard. You know, probably I would, if I was to do it again, I'd probably keep that hand 3 out of 5 times, but, you know, hindsight being 20/20.
How many times have you kept 1 resource hands?
I very rarely do, but it was like, you know, I'm sure
you did show your hand on stream afterwards. And while we had seen the majority of what you had drawn was expensive throwaway cards, and at one point you even tossed either a second soul marble or just a soul marble you had drawn into because you realized that even if you could play it, you couldn't. But I don't think I necessarily disagreed with the keep in the long term of things for that one. That seemed very interesting. Like, you know, you were a game up, you're on the draw, you could afford to take that chance, especially if your opponent's playing Talisman of Vitae combo sort of stuff. You know, you should have a turn or 2.
Right. Unfortunately, I didn't, and so that kind of put me a little bit on tilt for game 3. And so I get a hand that has 3 rubies, and the rest of my hand is diamond. And I was too gun shy to pitch it and go to a less than 3 shard hand after that game 2. So I kept it, and then I didn't see a diamond until he had 7 troops on the board. So yeah, that's on both the 5 shard streams and my stream.
So before you go on, I'm just thinking about 1 shard hands, and I actually know of only 1 shard hand I've ever kept in the history of me playing Hex, and the reason why I remember it is because it happens so rarely. And that was in a draft where the other card I had was 1 or 2 of the Koyodal that gives you a wild resource when you play them. Oh, Howling Brave. I can't believe I forgot that because I played so many times.
Wild Threshold.
Yes. And can also give you a resource when you exhaust them. And that was the only reason why I kept it, is because I had other ways. And I think maybe I had Chlorophylla in my hand, so it's obvious that it's not really a 1 resource hand. Any other time, or I guess the other time I've kept a 1 resource hand is if I have mulligan to 4 or 5 as well, which is a different story.
Right.
7 cards in Constructed, that scares me, just because there's a lot more possibility of having a clump in the deck with 60 cards. And I'd be hard-pressed to do that. But, I mean, I understand why you did it.
Yeah, like I said, you know, I was like Nick said, I was a game up. I was on the draw. I could afford I could afford this one, but it just turned out so badly that the next hand I got, the 3 ruby hand, should not have kept it. I should have thrown that away. That was just a poor keep on my part.
What else did you have in your hand besides 3 ruby?
It was all diamond cards.
Oh, okay.
It was a soul marble and a living totem and maybe an angel in there, but it was 3 resources, and I hadn't seen 3 resources the entire game too. So then I was 2-2. Game 5, I played against Noise, and Noise played a version of the Salt Shaker deck, which I had played a bunch of leading up into this tournament.
And explain, even though we did touch in on what you mean here earlier, right. You're talking about a 150 card Jankbot deck that is based on expanding out Gore Knights with every card you could possibly want to put in it, and then some. And it's there were 2 4-0s with similar decks in the last VIP, the constructed VIP, and I played it in that VIP. I got 2-2 with it. I found it to be super consistent, even though I did drop half my games. Like it was crazy consistent for a Jankbot deck. So the thing is, having played it a bunch, I kind of knew the tricks that he could possibly pull on it, and I actually brain farted at one point. He was at 6 and I was at 9, and he dropped a Jankbot when he had an Azure Fate Sorceress with the Speed Gem out, and then plays a Blaze Elemental, summons that up, and he swings for the fences with everything. And I look and I'm like, I only have a living totem and 6 resources available. I have to block the Jankbot and give him +1 and +1 and life drain. I didn't even do the math, but after everything had settled, all the dust had settled from the Jankbot summoning up another creature that did damage to me, I had 1 health, but he was completely exhausted. He had just had the one creature that the one troop that he had pulled out with the Jankbot, so I was able to finish him off. That was crazy close, but it was super fun. Game 2, he got Jags into Spy into Blaze Elemental, so that was over really fast. And Game 3, one of the keys to the Dr. Citadel deck is getting out a turn 2 Brawler in the tunnel, and then when he pops up on turn 5, if you've played enough resources to this point and you have a Citadel or a Zakir in your hand, you can get a turn 5 Citadel or Zakir, and at that point, unless your opponent's got a lot of answers, there's probably not much they can do. And so I got a turn 5 Citadel out. He was actually able to take out the towers with a Legionnaire, but then I top decked 2 more Angels, and he wasn't able to get past the walls. So now I was 3-2, and Game 6 is the round where my computer decided to overheat in the middle of the match. So I had to restart really quickly. It was actually versus Peace Tinker, one of our teammates, and he was playing Mono Blood, and I actually had tested against his Mono Blood deck before, and during the test he used Relentless Corruption over and over and over on me, and just used all my best cards against me. And I was like, I went to G Prime. I'm like, so, what do I do? And he's like, oh, it's Frost Wizard in that situation to help against the escalation cards. And I was like, oh yeah, it's absolutely right. Totally right. So Game 2, I totally brain fart and forget to side in Frost Wizard to help against the escalation cards. And he just did the same thing over again. So that was my biggest punt of the day, was Game 6. And that would have put me at 4-2, but now I'm 3-3. I go into Game 7. I'm playing against Tackfire, and he's playing one of the Blood Diamond Druze decks. Game 1, I get another Brawler into a Citadel, and but he was able to Extinction, but then at post-Extinction I got a Zakir out, and he gets the Eye of Zakir, so I void everything, and he's just top decking, and then Zakir just kills him. And Game 2, he gets all the free Angels, and he exiles anything I have that was relevant, and it was over super quick. I barely even remember that we played a second game. So Game 3... I do remember that happening.
Yeah. Game 3, I have 2 brawlers that help me blitz to a soul armament online. And then I get him down to 8, and that prevented him from readying Drews. And so I had an angel and a unicorn out with the soul armaments, and they just did the rest. So now I'm 4-3, and my last game of the day was against Phelon, who was also playing a Gore Feast, that sort of Blitz Feast deck with the really cheap orcs, the Savage. Yes,
the one that's like, you know, like as much as people rag on Gore Feast, it's even more frustrating playing the hyper aggressive Gore Feast variant,
right?
The one that loses straight up to an extinction, but sometimes beats you on turn 3, and you're just like,
Yep. That's Peacetinker's former specialty with Troll Feast, not the type you're talking about, still kind of the same concept.
Yeah, just a little more aggressive, less card draw, and less control.
Even a well-timed murder just tears those decks apart.
Oh yeah, it's like, it can just, even something as simple as a turns 1 Princess Victoria sometimes makes them just go, oh okay, right-click concede.
Right, yeah. I mean, it was so he got out the Savage Raider on turn 1. He gets out the Psychotic Anarchist on turn 2. I have nothing on the board, right? So he swings in with the Anarchist. So I draw a card in his turn, and the Angel comes into play for free.
Yeah. Another huge problem for Anarchist right there.
And so he said in chat FFS, and I was like, shrug, like it happens. And then I stabilized at 7. I got another Zakir out with a Brawler accelerated, and I got Soul Armaments online, and like you said, you know, I just stopped him long enough. Game 2, he got out Zoltog, and it was super scary until I got my Soul Armaments online. I'm sacrificing guys left and right, and he's still making Savage Raiders. But I got Soul Armaments online, I banks back my Angel, and he had no flyer protection. And so I just, with the Steadfast Swift Strike Angel, or Totem, and the Steadfast Angel, I was able to defeat him. So I went 5-3, and had a great time. Which is
respectable.
Yeah.
How do you remember your matches and games so clearly? Do you have a written record of this, or did you go back and watch them to try to...
I went back and watched them, because I don't usually remember exactly what happened, so I actually, knowing we were going to talk about this on the podcast, I spent the last hour going back and watching the matches so that I could give you guys a better analysis.
It surprises me how many people do that, just like as a little off-topic thing, because I got a couple of people messaging me on Twitch and in-game with references to specific commentary that I made during their matches. Mostly it was positive feedback, which was really exciting. But people going, oh yeah, that play that you suggested would have worked out better in that situation, and other things. There's one match in particular which was between Hacky and... I'm trying to remember I believe it was...
Coach Flip?
No. It was the second time we had Hacky on. It wasn't Skirovic, it wasn't Stormchild, it's an S name. I remember that. I should remember their name because, like I said, they sent me a specific message. I'm sure it'll come to me, like, at the worst time, and I'll be like,
Falling Skies? Was it Falling Skies?
Maybe? I think it might have been Stormchild, now that I think about it. Anyway,
yeah, Stormchild. Yeah.
It was a match where near the end, Hacky played a Burn to the Ground for 13 of his possible 14 resources, and that would have left Stormchild on 1. And I remember saying something along the lines of like, I don't think I would use Blinding Light here if I had it, and he did. Hacky responded with Burn. It turned out to be what he needed to win the game. As to whether or not that made a difference comes up a lot because Hacky, who could see his hand that we couldn't, mentioned to me today actually that, I had 2 or 3 burns in hand. I would have gotten resources back from the Burn to the Ground, so I could have played them all in response or something like that, but it was just interesting to hear from both of them how that match goes. The long and the short of it being, it's interesting how many people go back and watch matches that they were participating in, because it just always seems weird to me. Well, because I don't do it.
Well, here's the thing. It's
the right thing to do.
We appreciate your shoutcasting. Your shoutcasting is amazing. Like, I'm not just like trying to build you up here. Like, it's really good. And so when I was playing my feature match, like, I have you muted because I don't want a distraction of trying to listen to you or listen to you maybe suggesting plays. I don't want any of that. You're muted, right? And so I'm just going to play the game I'm going to play. I know that I'm being streamed, so when I've got a terrible hand in one shard, I'm going to pull down my card blocker so you can all see exactly how terrible I'm doing. And I should have pitched that hand. So like the first thing after everything and the stream went up, I went back and I watched my match because I wanted to see how you guys shoutcasted it. And it was very, very nice of you when I finally drew a Ruby for you to highlight card. Probably the only time of the day you highlight card a resource, sliding it in to show, this is what a Ruby shard does.
That's technically
in case you forgot.
I legitimately didn't know he was doing that. So like when you told me about that later, I was like, oh, that what? You know, and I had to go and talk to Technophy. I was like, well, that was a little rude. Like, why would you do that? And he was like, well, it was just the most pertinent card at the time, so I brought it up on the... Anyway.
Well, I mean, part of the reason why I go back and watch the matches I've been in is just to get out of my head a little bit and to see what the neutral observer is saying and watching at the same time. And if sometimes it's insightful things that I might have missed just because I'm in the middle of the game and I'm thinking deeply about what's in my hand, what's available, and not necessarily as clearly looking at what's at the board state. So it's just fantastic to go back there and also see what other people are saying and sometimes what chat is saying as well. Whether you're the hero or the villain of the story is also fun to find out.
Oh, absolutely. So with Dr. Citadel, like, even though, you know, we didn't really do better than 5 and 3 with it, I don't think I've given up on it. I think there's still a deck here. I mean, even like the morning of the tournament, we were talking about, like, does the deck need Repel? And like, you know, many people have submitted their deck list already. Things like, I didn't put Repel in it, and I hadn't actually finished submitting my deck, so I put in 2 Repels and for use against the Blood Diamond control versus Vampire Kings in particular, and it turned out to be a good call. I definitely liked Repel, and I've been playing around with it a little bit to try and figure out if there's anything else, because the brawler into a turn 5 something is so good that I'm trying to figure out if there's anything else, a King Gabriel or a Guardian Angel or something that is also great to build into for an early big drop on that.
So one thing I wanted you to do was compare your deck to the ultimate winner of the tournament, which is Cyrus, who won with a Ruby Diamond deck. And is there much similarity between the Diamond Ruby builds, or are you just different directions entirely?
I think we were fairly different directions for our decks. Cyrus's deck, I'm trying to bring it up here so I'm not talking without knowing. So yeah, Cyrus's deck, you know, it had a lot of the same, the core stuff, the Hope Art Unicorns, the Living Totems, the Meeks, but being centered around Drew's Colossal Walker and using Dimid. Dimid with Drew's is basically Drew's hits, and you're able to ready it. You know, it's a big troop. You know, it's a 8/8 for 5 with Crush, and it's an artifact, so it's not getting murdered. So it's a great troop to build a deck around, and that's what we had here. We had a Drew's Colossal Walker that was built around with, you know, Diamond and Ruby, and you know, he's got, you know, the main deck Heatwave, whereas we in Dr. Citadel had Heatwave in the reserves for the Gore Feast matchups. You know, his deck, a lot of people said his deck was specifically made to beat Gore Feast, which may be true, and a lot of people did bring those types of decks to the Ruby Cup, but he barely played against any Gore Feast during the tournament and still won the whole thing.
How many Gore Feasts did you play against?
I played against 3. I believe. Let me just check one last time. 4, if you count the Salt Shaker.
That's probably worth counting.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's 4. Also high. That's actually higher than average. Most people would have encountered next to none. like with not next to none, but like topping out at 1 or 2, I feel like is where most people looked at. So kind of like Cyrus, it was a very gore feast light tournament as far
30%.
as 22%.
Or yeah, it was 30 out of 138 decks or so. So less than that. So I mean, that's a light. I guess it's light than what people expected for other tournaments, but I don't think it was that light. It's still a decent showing.
I mean, it's still like about a fifth. Yeah, like it's a lot of people playing that deck, but not a lot. Like if you look at the amount of them that played after round 2, it starts going down in the number of them that you're going to see. Like a lot of them went X1 in their first game, going back and looking at the decks.
Right.
So,
yeah, I mean, I ended up playing against 4 of them. I ended up beating 4 of them. So, the Dr. Citadel did what it set out to do, which was beat Gorefeast. But it was, like I said, it was those weird decks that, the charge-based Sapphire Wild deck and the Blood Diamond deck with Cerebral Domination. It's just those weird things that I just hadn't counted upon.
Okay. Going forward, I know you were talking about some changes to your deck. Do you think I guess we'll be talking about the evolving meta shortly, but going forward, do you think if the meta becomes substantially less Gorefeast, does the deck in its current version make sense?
That's a really good question. I want to say yes, because I have invested a lot of time into working with the deck and playing it, and I played it, for an entire day. I think it can get there with just a couple changes to some cards. I really think that Scrap Tech Brawler is super good, and some of those big legendary cards that cost a lot, and everyone's like, oh, this is unplayable because it costs 6, 7, 8 resources, are suddenly super playable when you've got a Scrap Tech Brawler, Underground, and a bunch of resources in your hand. And then you're just like, oh, if I draw any one of my 8 win conditions here, I'll be able to play them on turn 5 and win. So yeah, I think there's a chance for it. Just gonna have to play it against more different decks and kind of run it through a gauntlet and see what needs to change.
Okay. Penta, any thoughts about the deck beyond what you've already expressed?
I kind of expected it to show a better showing. I got to read what happened in our team chat. So I know that there were a lot of matchups, specifically where it was just bad luck. It's not nice to call it that, but there is potential for bad luck to strike, which kept people out of the top. Going 6-2 or 7-1. Like a 6-2 showing would have been very strong. I don't believe it would have been enough to make the top 8. I believe the entire top 8 was 6-1-1 or 6-0-2s.
Yes, that's correct.
Unfortunate. But that's just how it is. Sometimes you run into that. You prepare for a certain meta, and then a different meta takes you down. I'm looking forward to seeing how people handle the resurgence of Soul Marble.
Yeah, there was some talk about in the team of talking about taking Soul Marble out of Dr. Citadel. They're like, maybe it's not needed. I went back and I watched my games, and like a lot of my wins were on the back of Soul Marble. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going anywhere. That's staying in the deck.
I mean, Soul Marble is incredibly powerful, but it's like, if it ever gets removed, it's such an investment of resources. Like, there's 2 ways to look at it, right? If you're still maintaining board presence after it's removed, then you come out ahead because you had like a bonus place to put your resources. If you're counting on Soul Marble and it gets removed, it's a heavy investment that you're losing. It's very different, the types of times that you lose it. So cards like I believe it's Gobbleglade Witch deals with constants, Nature Reigns, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Anything that destroys a constant either has the potential to just be a minor annoyance or a fantastic blowout against you, which is pretty crazy.
Well, most of those cards are sideboard cards, and so you get to play a fun game with those about to whether or not you just remove them from your deck. The last time I played against Cabal Papa against his Wild Ruby deck, maybe 3 weeks ago in the 8-person queue, I was playing Blood Diamond, because what other deck would I play besides Blood Diamond? And knowing that he was going to side in his Gobbleglade Witches, presumably he's playing something like that in his sideboard, I sided out both my Solitary Exiles and my Soul Marbles. And so he would play his Witches immediately, and they just wouldn't do anything except for being bodies. That's not terrible, but it's not why they're there. And so it gives you a little bit of advantage, because it's, the one thing Wild gained in the Witches is that they no longer have dead cards. They at least have a presence on the board. But it still feels pretty good for them to just be sitting there and not doing much. And so you basically get to play that game. In Game 2, if you want to remove all those constants out, then you may be in a stronger position. And in Game 3, if they realize you did that, then they may have taken them out and you can put yours back in, or they may not realize you took them out and will just keep the Witches in there anyways.
Right.
Unless you say, by the way, I took out all my constants in Game 2, guess whether I'm going to put them back in Game 3. And those are some true mind games you can always play with your opponent. If you want to do that. So, since we are already leaning that way, we should probably talk about the top 8, which they are listed on the 5 Shards website. We'll be posting the link in the podcast chat, or the podcast write-up as well. Penta, you covered these quite extensively. Do you want to give us a quick rundown on what we saw?
Alright, so the winning deck, as has been discussed with Cyrus's, it's a very familiar Ruby Diamond deck that he displayed on the top 8 of... Not the top 8, but the undefeated 4-0 constructed VIP tournaments recently. It centers around Angels removal, Hope Hearts Drues, and using Dimit to maintain your health. I wouldn't say it's simple necessarily, but it's basically Drues, Soul Marble, Angels, and removal. You know, it's what you expect. Some of the other decks that we saw, some of the interesting ones for sure. Tonkill was the only top 8 player who brought the traditional Gore Feast list. I believe it's almost 1-to-1 the winning deck that Future took to the HexTechs Open. I'm not sure if it's exactly 1-to-1, but it's incredibly similar, including the one of a Warbot dropship in the reserves. Guer managed to top 8 with a Ruby Wild mid-range beatdown deck, which I thought was really cool. It focused on beating your opponent eventually with an Arborean Rootfather. It suffered from what most Ruby and Wild decks normally would suffer from, the lack of card draw, but was still fairly powerful. Ran a lot of 2-ofs, 2 main Filcape, 2 main Lord Alexander, 2 main Crackling Bolt. Awkwardly, only 3 Arborean Rootfather. It was an interesting deck, and it made up for its lack of draw by playing Tetsit, who could occasionally create a new troop. We did see it at one point create a 1/1, so that hurt him. Seju brought Sapphire Diamond, not so much pass go, not so much draw go, so to speak. A little more aggressive with a tempo Sapphire Diamond, Angels, Buccaneers, Totems, Mirror Knights, and then Hope Hearts, combined together with the traditional Sapphire counter magics, the Diamond Exiles, and remove threats, get tempo through. Kind Mind was running a Running Deer Wild Ruby as well. Same thing as Guer. Not the same thing so much. Focused a little bit more on getting Scrap Tech ramp into Arborean or Wrathwood Colossus and Eye of Creation. Havoc was running Sapphire Wild, which I was pretty excited to see. Although the deck had some interesting matchups, so to speak, when he got to the finals there. He was saying he didn't feel like he had many good matchups, but he did make the top 8, so Minoria Sensei's Buccaneers, Eldritch Dreamers with card draw, Azure Fates with Flight and Spell Shield, Wrathwood Master Moss, Sight of the Sun. It was just Sapphire Wild good stuff, which, you expect to see. Strife was running Ruby Wild as well. Another Eye of Creation, Master Mosses, Root Fathers. I don't think there were any Wrathwood in his... Yeah, no, now that I think back to it, I think there was. Strife and Kind Mime had very similar decks. Kind Mime making his third appearance at the top 8. And finally, there was Kaldheim brought a 18 resource Dwarven Robot beat your face in deck that was essentially a hyper aggro dwarf deck that tried to win on turn 4 or 5 and potentially lost if it didn't. The most expensive troops in the deck were Tectonic Megahulks, which you never played for 10. You always tunneled. I think his deck could have been helped by the unbanning of Fishersmith, for example. According to our previous rule set, he could have run Fishersmith in his list, but we outright banned it for the tournament just due to the complications that can arise, and did arise the last time we allowed it in. Fishersmith just sometimes totally messing with the game with its bug, forcing players to play very awkwardly around it. But yeah, it was very crazy to see a deck that, without the Mega Hulks, probably cost $3 total, and was able to just... every time we saw it in the feature match, it was just shoving its fist into people's face, which was really exciting.
As such, I'm not even sure the Fishersmiths make the main board. Maybe they do, but it's something you're using as a defensive card, and this deck does not want to be on the defensive for the most part, unless you're building up the Mega Hulk.
It doesn't want to be on the defensive, but it's still a dwarf, which is important. It still helps build plans if the opponent swings in, and it helps in the matchups. Almost every matchup that you can think of, it helps by just being a body. Probably more so than the Mimeobots, if you ask me. Yeah, I can see replacing the 3 Mimeobots with 3 Fishersmith, but the Mimeobot apparently did a lot of work for him. Didn't see any of that in the featured matches.
You did not see him in any feature matches?
We saw him in the featured match, but we didn't see the Mimeobot necessarily do anything that warranted its place in the deck. Okay. But a lot of people who played against him, or even himself, Kaldheim, did say that he thought that the Mimeobot was a big part of the deck, so...
Have you played the deck yourself? Have either of you?
No, I was going through and I was making these decks just so I had a gauntlet to throw out stuff in the team testing stuff, but I didn't get down to Kaldheim's. But a couple of the other ones I did, and they were really fun. But I really want to get to playing this deck to get back on Fishersmith. I mean, the thing is, it's only tunneling 1, so
yeah. I mean, it's a 2/1 that pops up on 3.
You're gonna get it. It's not like it's stuck underground forever. If you tunnel it and it kills a troop, awesome. It pops up early by half a turn. It's going to pop up anyway. So one of the things there's several things worth mentioning about this top 8. The big one is that a lot of people have mentioned on the forums as well. In fact, there's an entire forum thread dedicated to this, but as well as on Reddit, that there's not a overwhelming presence of Gorfies, even though something like 22% of the tournament was Gorfies decks, only one made it to top 8, which means that people either breathe a sigh of relief or they're looking for something else to complain about as being overwhelmingly determining the meta, which that's not to say that just because this 8 does not have a lot of Gorfies in it does not mean that Gorfies is or is not affecting the meta. Several of these decks are built to beat it. Kind Mime and Strife are both part of the same team. They are both Dragonborns who are sponsoring the Wild Cup in a couple months, and so they've been working on this deck since at least December. I know Cabal Papa's baby, Eye of Creation, Ruby Wild, he's been working on for a very long time, trying to make it work in set 2. And of note, they also were one of the big proponents of the Eye of Creation deck during set 1, and had 2 people top 8 with it in
the March HexTCG Pro Challenge series back in March with the Eye of Creation decks back then. So they loved the deck, or at least they really like Eye of Creation. And the one deck that Penta already mentioned that's related to this is the Guar. Is it Guar or Guar? Guar? From what I've read in chat, this is actually Wordle's deck they gave to Guar. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that's genuine.
Yeah,
he was not just claiming credit.
Yeah.
And Wordle is a very well-known deck builder. And it's kind of similar to the other decks. It's going for a mid-rangey, big impact on the board while having answers for Gorefeast type of deck. But it forsakes the Eye of Creation route and just goes with putting big troops onto the board. And Wordle, who recently had kids, has been kind of out of the competitive scene for a little bit, but he's still in the background, building some of the best decks in the meta.
Yeah. Hex Colin, a well-known community member, I believe dropped around 2 or 3, and sent me, while he was talking in 5 Shards chat, our Skype group for the 5 Shards affiliated folk, and said something along the lines of just play Wordle's deck. That's the rule he's learned, is just play Wordle's deck, except he was a little more I believe the abbreviation he put out there was JPWFD. I'll let you all decipher that one as you go, but it was... I
saw the acronym, I'm like, I have no idea what Colin's talking about.
Well, it's funny that you didn't, because I responded within like a minute or so with the correct answer. Yeah, there it was.
So, very diverse top 8. Is there any common card that we need to rally against that is destroying the game?
I mean, obviously, there's one technical genius in the entire top. I don't know if there's like a... I don't know if there was a single card. Like, Heatwave is obviously a very good established meta main card based against, like, okay, Gorefeast is popular, let's put this in.
It's been established mostly by Gorefeast decks doing that, saying, oh, we're going to play against our own deck, we might as well have Heatwave in here.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like probably the two most powerful cards on the entire list are Wrathwood Mastermoss and Wrathwood Colossus / Arborean Rootfather, which kind of fulfill the same role of just being a troop that single-handedly ends games. Wrathwood Colossus ends the game, air quotes, by giving you a massive crush troop that regains you health every time it enters play. And Arborean Rootfather does 16 damage, usually, which is pretty heavy. I mean, it's hard to say. There's a lot of Mirror Knights in the top 8 still. 4 decks running Mirror Knights, I believe. Or 3 decks running them. Yeah, 3 decks running them. 1 Havoc awkwardly had 2 main, 2 reserves. I feel like if you're playing Cerulean's main, you play all 4 main, but I mean, he made top 8, so clearly it worked. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything necessarily to rally against. I think this is just a nice, diverse top 8, and it just played out right for once.
Well, I mean, even if it was dominated by Gorefeast, I wouldn't suggest people should rally against the cards.
Well, no, of course not.
So, Matt, what do you think of the top 8?
I love the diversity. I love the fact that there was just the one Gorefeast. I love the fact that Zakir, who I've grown to love, made a couple appearances, and he's just super fun. Like when you're talking about cards and Hex and like, oh, that's super powerful and stuff, Zakir is one of those cards that has a random component to it, and being random, that drives a lot of like hyper analytical players crazy, because they don't want any randomness in their competition. They want to know the results of everything. It's bad enough that you have to shuffle the deck, right? But having Zakir in a couple of these decks, because those Power Zakir cards are
all 5 of them.
All 5 of them are pretty good. And
admittedly, when you got 3 Servants of Zakir, any of the other 4 would have been good for you.
Sure, yeah.
Probably better. even.
Yeah, there was times where I got Servant and I was like, oh, I wish this was something. There was times I got an Eye and I was like, I don't want to void all non-dragons actually, because that actually puts me in a worse position. And so it's fun. I love Zakir. I love the fact that he's hit a couple of these top 8 decks and kind of making a splash, a name for himself in these decks.
Given your deck, what do you think you have the worst matchups against?
What do I think I have the worst matchups against? Anything that's running Solitary Exile.
So the Sapphire Diamond deck?
Yeah, so Cyrus's deck. I didn't play. I think I ran Dr. Citadel in a constructed 8-man, and I played against I think it was Strife's deck, and it just totally destroyed me. So that wasn't very fun. He hit Eye of Creations left, right, and center, and it just wasn't. It's just I just couldn't do anything. So there's too much stuff on the board. Like I was really like, wow, I really wish I was playing Blood so I could Extinction at least and recover. So because I'd been playing Blood Diamond for a while, so that whenever I see I have Diamond, I always in the back of my mind think I've got Extinction in there somewhere. So.
Well, going forward, we probably should expect to see a ton of Wild Ruby if 3 of the top 8 are Wild Ruby decks.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And that's something to keep in mind when you're trying to decide whether or not Dr. Citadel is still something that you need to be playing in the rest of the meta. You're also going to see Diamond Ruby decks as well, because the Diamond and Ruby deck won the tournament, so people are going to start looking to that as the new standard bearer to take 2 tournaments.
Yeah, thanks,
Cyrus. It doesn't seem to happen as often in Hex, awkwardly. Like, in other card games, the winning deck usually goes through a trial of more players than a Hex tournament, if that makes sense.
What do you mean?
Well, like, just it's just like a larger scale tournament, usually. Well, not usually, it's just other card games have defined tournaments that you don't take your top 8 from your local card shop.
Right.
You take your top 8 from the latest regional or state or provincial or world event. And the things that make it to the top of those, people are like, well, this must be really good. In Hex, people seem to go, yeah, this did well at, the Blood Cup, but, I'm going to run whatever I want anyway, because that was only 150 people. Even though that still makes up a considerable chunk of, it still went 8 rounds and won, so it should still be noted. Or 7.5 rounds, I suppose, with ID as being a thing sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 150, 130 people still pretty sizable amount.
Yeah, no, I mean, I personally look at the top 8 as a pretty good example of what I should be looking for. But, it's awkward. It's awkward to think that Gorfy's made an extremely powerful showing at the one HexTechs Open, and then still only made up a fifth of the playing field this time around, despite it being a fairly cheap deck to make. I mean, it's not cheap in its core form, Mirror Knights and Storm Clouds, but it's easy to replace those cards and still think you have something workable.
Well, I think part of it is the next step up is that people have been saying, yes, Gorfy's is a strong deck, but it's also a very beatable deck. You just have to build a deck for it. And many of the people who are playing in these tournaments are looking to win the tournaments and not just play the best Gorfy's possible, but be able to play the deck that beats it. We saw with the HexTCG Pro Invitational Tournament that several decks that were going in there had 2 goals in mind: beat Gorfy's and beat Blood Diamond. And the result of this is that there's one Gorfy's deck run by Future, and there was maybe a couple Blood Diamond decks that were in there, and no one was running it. And so these decks that were designed to beat Blood Diamond now had to beat things like Mono Sapphire, which they were not prepared to do. And the actual numbers of how many showed up is something that Wordle went through. And so it depends on how into the scene and into the meta your player base is. And right now, a lot of people who are playing in these tournaments are higher level constructed players who don't want to run the same deck everyone else is likely to run, but they want to beat that deck. So I think you're right in that when the player base expands, we'll see maybe a higher representation of what happened last tournament. Just because we may have people who are like, well, I don't have a team to test and I don't think I'm that innovative, so I'm going to play the best deck from last week and hopefully do well with that. Maybe I'll take it down still.
Going back to your mind games of did I take my soul marbles out or did I not? There's a little bit of that here too, right? Sure. Am I running Gore Feast or am I not? Are you going to anti-Gore Feast me or are you going to Gore Feast yourself? Right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of questions. It's just how it shook out in the end was a lesser showing of Gore Feast than we were used to up to this point. And the community may correct. They may go, oh, wow, nobody played Gore Feast, but one still made it to the top 8 anyway. We should all get on the Gore Feast train again. So, who knows?
So, we're already spilling into it, but let's talk about future metas. The first thing that I should mention before we talk about the immediate meta is that the Sapphire Cup is the next 5 Shards Cup, which is hosted by Colin, and Colin announced, or gave it to Penta to announce in the stream, that the prize pool for that tournament will include, in addition to normal prizes, $500 in cash. First place will win $250.
Cash.
Second place will win $150, and third and fourth place will each win $50 apiece.
Cash.
Which is insane. This is, and in fact, Penta and I said, you're a little bit crazy there, Colin.
Yeah, no, we both called him crazy. It's actually, like, I feel like, not so much name dropping, but as much as saying here, like, I kind of wish that we had known Colin was going to be the one who chose to sponsor the Cup of Fate long ago, because when he was announcing this, me and Mike's immediate response was, wow, you're crazy, like, that's insane, that's very generous. And he left us the cryptic message of, you should, wait and see what I do for the Cup of Fate, winky face. And we were just like, oh, okay, I guess we will wait and see. So if you aren't excited about earning points to try to make it to the Cup of Fate, you guys should probably get excited, because Colin's the kind of person that will probably make that an incredibly reasonable event to be a part of. So the first cash payout in Hex tournament history is happening next month. I think we're going to have a large turnout for that. I mean, we haven't set the website for it or anything at this point, but I'm sure people will be excited for it. It's happening on March 14th, though. It's going to be standard constructed.
Standard constructed.
Which is before anyone... Okay, so I'm going to explain this one more time. I've explained it a lot of times, but I'm going to explain it one more time because it's necessary. So the 5 Shards website currently has in brackets beside the Sapphire Cup that it would ideally be limited if feasible through the client. It's not feasible through the client right now, and I appreciate what is getting close to the probably 30 or 40 different people who have approached and tried to make suggestions that we could use or try to make use of to improve and make a limited tournament viable. But there's multiple things that people keep overlooking when they come up with this. First of all, you cannot make, save, and play with a 40-card deck in the Proving Grounds. That's the biggest and number one limiting factor. The other thing being, our idea was to have this go through the actual client itself, and it would actually force us to impose sort of an entry fee, so to speak. Like, you would have to justify the packs being opened. And obviously we're not capable of supplying 200 plus players with 3 to 6 packs each. It just doesn't work. So, as much as I appreciate the constant amount of feedback that we have received about the limited stuff, it's not possible in the client yet.
I mean, we designated that as something we hope would happen in Season 2 or 3. We were pretty sure it would happen in Season 1.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, it would be truly fantastic to do a limited tournament. And even possibly to have done a non-standard constructed format, but at the end of the day, when it comes to the non-standard constructed thing, we asked the sponsor of the event, Colin, what he would prefer for things to be, and he said standard constructed. The Diamond Cup was an interesting once-off, I would say. Potentially what we will have to do for the second Diamond Cup, depending on release schedules, but I think set 3 will be out by then. What I was going to say is I don't think we're going to have to wait.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think set 3 will be out by then.
It should be.
But yeah, so again, as much as the thought is there, and I appreciate people's thoughts on it, it's just really not something we can feasibly do right now. So it's going to be standard constructed, but Wild Cup is going to be team standard constructed.
The other announcement that we leaked.
Yeah, which is actually really exciting if you ask me. I don't know how other people feel about it, but I'm certainly... I think that team constructed is about as cool as something gets. We won't be able to do very good stream coverage of 3 players playing at once.
No, it'll just be individual. So the way the team constructed is going to work is this unified team constructed, assuming all the details work out as we prepare this, because things can change if things aren't working out, is that you will have a team of 3. These could be just 2 other random people on your team. They could be guildies, they could be teammates. They don't have to be teammates from a testing team. It's just 2 other people you want to play with. And normally what happens is you designate one person the A player, one person the B player, and one person the C player, and your A player will play against the opposing team's A player, your B player will play against the other person's B player, and your C player will play against the other person's C player. Of note, you do not necessarily designate them by strength. There is some strategy on who you make the middle player, who you make the first player, like who is the aggro deck, who's the control deck, who's the mid-range deck, if you go that route. Also, with Unified Team Constructed, the way it works is that you can only have 4 copies of a card for the entire team. So, if you really want to play Extinction, only one person or the entire team as a whole can only have 4 copies of Extinction. So either split those up or give them to one deck. Which means that you cannot play 3 copies or 3 decks of Gorefeast on your team either. Which makes it a very interesting strategy in determining where to overlap on shards if you do so. Or you could just go, I'll play Mono Diamond, I'll play Mono Sapphire, I'll play Mono Blood. And that solves things very easily, though you may not be doing as well for teams who are...
Well, you have 5 shards to pick from. You can go 2, 2, and 1, so...
No, you obviously can't. Just give you an example of a way to prevent any crossover whatsoever. But it becomes increasingly hard to have something like a Blood Diamond player on your team when Blood gets used by a couple of the main top decks, and so is Diamond at this point.
Yeah, I think it'll force out some interesting archetypes that maybe weren't on the table before, if that makes sense.
So we want to talk about this a little bit early just so people can start thinking of other people to play with. The tournament's hosted. The Wild Cup will be in April, and it's hosted by the Dragonborns. The Sapphire Cup is hosted by Colin. It will be in March 14th, and that one has cash money as a prize. So,
and for anyone that hasn't figured it out, it's insanely unlikely that we will move those days. We didn't move from Mountains. Mountains didn't move that date, so you can probably feel safe in the dates listed on the website.
Given how much flack and push and pull we got for that day, I
should probably be very aware of the fact that we're not moving this.
Exceedingly happy that we still had 138 people turn out. 160 people signed up, or 160 people signed up, and 138 showed up and played on a date that everyone told us was terrible and that people wouldn't show up for. It's all about consistency. Second weekend of every month, 5 shards tournament. So we don't talk too much about our own tournaments, which we'll talk about in the future as well. The next big tournament, the one that will be happening a few short days after you get this podcast, is the HexTechs Open, which is a paid entry fee. It's 500 platinum to play, and first place pays out 100 plat, and then there's other cash prizes as well. Also, you earn
with the potential of the prize growing.
I think it's more than 100 plat.
Oh, well, sorry, $100 in plat. Good call, because
it'd be kind of interesting if that. Yeah, you win a fifth of your entry back for placing first.
Good call, Matt. Right now, the signups are around 12 to 16 people, but as we've seen before, usually you get a flood of signups within the last day or two. Also, they got official mention on HexTCG.com, so those numbers should jump up. The last one had somewhere between 50 and 60 people, and it was some of the most competitive constructed players in the tournament or in the community, because they're paying money, they expect to win, or they plan on doing very well. But going into that, we need to talk about the meta, so people are prepared. Do you expect that at least one copy of each of the top 8 decks will be played for that tournament?
Well, I'm not sure about one of each. I'm sure we'll see some Wild Ruby Eye of Creation decks. I almost assuredly believe that we will see some of those. I'm sure Cyrus's deck will get some love. Some people will play that. I think people will probably look at Havoc's deck and probably change around some of the numbers, but I expect to see some Sapphire Wild. What I'm interested in is how many people are actually going to try to bring Kaldheim's deck to the matchup. Was it a fluke that it made it there, or does the Rush Dwarf beatdown actually, work out in the long run? It's hard to say. So either we're going to see a bunch of those, or maybe Kaldheim himself only running that deck again. Kind of a toss-up.
Matt, how are you preparing for this tournament?
I am preparing for this tournament the same way I've prepared for the other tournaments, which is to go into our Skype chat, ask if anyone's available to test, have no one available to test, and play against the AI for about an hour. But that's not entirely true. Many times I've gotten testing done. There's a couple decks out there that the team has been working on that are interesting and were not played or did not place in the top 8 in the Ruby Cup. And I definitely want to see if any of those can run the gauntlet against the top 8 here, see how they fare, especially against Gorfy, especially against Cyrus's deck. I think those two are going to be highly representative, although Cyrus's deck is expensive. 4 Angels of Dawn in there is always going to make your deck more expensive. So there was some talk of let's fix Dr. Citadel. There was some talk of let's try deck X, deck Y. I know there's it is a week and a day away, and we really, haven't solidified behind anything yet. So it's gonna be a wild week coming up here.
Yeah, that's true.
And in fact,
I think most people in our group actually have an idea of what they want to run. They just haven't.
But I don't think that idea is gonna do what they want it to do.
Well, maybe. We'll see.
Of note, I mean, you've already mentioned this, but also the team didn't solidify around one deck for the Ruby Cup because there's still some people who are not overly happy with that direction of Diamond Ruby, or they just wanted to do their own brew. Peace Tinker has been on a crazy blood kick recently, and he just really wanted to play Mono Blood for the tournament.
Yeah, I think Peace Tinker played that Mono Blood, and there was another someone else didn't play Dr. Citadel.
So
a Farney deck, I think.
Going into the tournament, you often have to make costs or decisions. Of course, you have to make decisions. You have to make opportunity costs. No matter what deck you play, it will lose to some decks and it will beat other decks. What are the 2 decks your deck has to beat going into the HexTechs Open?
Well, it still has to be able to beat Gorfeast.
Okay. You think Gorfeast will be played enough to be a threat?
I don't think. I don't think it's left enough. It's not like there's so few people running it that you can count on not running into at least one. And if you lose to one in these kind of tournaments, you either have to perform very well the rest of the day, or you're kind of on a string, for the rest of the event. So, specifically, yes, I think you have to be able to not lose to the aggro matchups, of which there are a couple now, not just Gorfeast. But if you're able to beat Gore Feast, you should be able to beat some of the other aggressive formats, kind of like the hyper-aggressive Orc Feast, or even, to some extent, the Kaldheim's Dwarf Aggro Rush. But I think you also need to be able to stand your own against just like a solid Sapphire Diamond. Not so much like the Ruby Diamond that won the last event, not so much like Blood Diamond Control. I think you need to be able to defeat the Control/Tempo Sapphire Diamond at least half of the time. And if you can do that, you should be able to do favorable, at least halfway favorable in the matchups that consider either of those shards. So in Diamond Ruby, you should be able to beat the Diamond version. And in Blood Diamond, you should be able to beat the Diamond, or in Blood Sapphire, you should be able to deal with the Sapphire. Like, you should be able to deal with bounce, you should be able to deal with aggression, and you should be able to deal with just straight up control if you can. That's a lot to ask for with a single deck. Yeah, no, it sounds like a lot, but I'm not necessarily saying that you need to be able to beat all of those things. You just need to account for their existence. Specifically, if you asked, for cards, you have to be able to beat Gore Feast and Soul Marble.
Okay, Matt.
If a Soul Marble resolves and you can't beat it, you should reevaluate your deck.
Matt, can you give me 2 archetypes that you think you have to have nailed down to be able to beat with your deck going into the next tournament?
Yeah, I think the Eye of Creation decks, you need to figure out if your deck just loses to them, to a cast Eye of Creation,
Pardon?
to a played Eye of Creation.
Okay.
And if that's the case, then you need to reconsider what you're bringing. That's one, because I think Eye of Creation is going to get played, especially after having 2 of the 8 in the top 8 here with Eye of Creation. And then the other one, of course, being Gore Feast. It's always going to be a threat. It's always going to be out there. I played half my games against deck with Gore Feast in it, even though far less than half the field out there brought Gore Feast to the tournament. You may be that guy. You may be me and end up playing far too much Gore Feast than you had to. So make sure you can beat it.
Let's see.
What do you think, Mike?
What do I think?
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, I don't think I'm going to be able to make the HexTechs open just because of time constraints. I think at this point you're going to see a lot of Ruby Wild mid-range decks, which is what you have to be able to deal with. And so having a plan against something like a Arborean Rootfather, such as Blinding Light, would be fantastic. And also dealing with Wrathwood Colossus, either beating them by going faster or having removal for it is a good idea. So the Ruby Wild would be on the top of my list, and then second on my list would probably be Gore Feast. I mean, it's going to be played by people. That's passive voice. People are going to play it, which means that I'm taking a hit on things like Diamond Sapphire or Blood Diamond unless I'm playing a deck like that already. And so that would be my call at this point, because you can't beat everything, so you have to figure out what's not going to be played as much. And I guess what I'm saying is that you have to beat mid-range, because Gore Feast, as played in the Ruby Sapphire variant, is a mid-range deck. It's not aggro like the Orc aggro deck is or the Mono Ruby aggro deck is. So I guess if you want to beat mid-range, the way you beat mid-range is by playing control. Yeah.
Shock.
So let's go ahead and talk about the next step in our podcast, which is draft, or at least drafting a pack. And it will be our concluding topic for tonight. So the rare in this pack is a Sickle Striker. The uncommons are Queensguard, Shard of Savagery, and Born to Die. The commons are Overtime Bot, Crackling Boon, Cottontail Scout, Molten Slaggard, Cerulean Mirror Magi, Manti Ranger, Construct Foreman, Feeding the Young Ones, Construction Plans, Crank Rocket, Royal Herald, and Ridge Raider. And since I usually make someone else go first, I'll just pick my first card to begin with, which is Queensguard, because that card is hard to deal with. It's an early drop, and it can explode pretty easily. So we'll have Matt pick the next 2 cards, or pick his 2 cards, I should say.
Sure. I know you like Queensguard because you like going humans. I know I will only go humans probably if there's a Royal Herald in pack 1. I like going Dwarf Robot. I've had a lot of success with Dwarf Robot. And looking in here are 2 cards that I would love to have in my Dwarf Robot deck, which is Construction Plans Crank Rocket, which is...
There's a Royal Herald in here.
Is there... Oh, sorry, Royal Cutblood. Sorry.
Okay.
Wow, sorry. I apologize, I got the name of the card wrong.
I honestly thought you meant Royal Valkyrie.
No, I did too. I was being sarcastic.
No, Royal Cutblood.
There's a lot of cards with Royal in their name. They're all good. They're all good.
Falconer.
Good cards.
Yeah. Den Mother, Falconer. Wow. It's like...
like 30 of them.
It's crazy. Anyway, Construction Plans Crank Rocket is great removal in your Dwarf Robot deck, especially if you can get... some recursion going with it, with the dwarf whose name escapes me at the moment, and Construct.
But it's not Royal Diplomat.
It's not Royal Diplomat. And Construct Foreman. I love Construct Foreman. It's just it's got a place in my heart because the first set 2 draft I won was on the back of 3 Construct Foremans in my deck. So the thing is, I know he will wheel if there's not other tempting Dwarf Robot cards in this pack, and nobody else decides to go in Dwarf Robots, which happens all the time. We've talked about that on the podcast. So I'm probably going to pick Construction Plans Crank Rocket as my first pick. And then when the pack comes back around and nobody has weirdly taken anything else out of it,
first you submit a ticket.
First I submit a ticket, and then I look at it, and I ask myself, do I want that Construct Foreman, or is there better in here? Probably yes in Queensguard, so I will take Queensguard as my second pick.
Penta, you get 3.
Well, I'm going to take the Subtle Striker first. A 2/2 body, a rare, and it does something that very few cards in the entire game can do. It shuts down your opponent's charge power. It's incredibly powerful against the powerful archetypes that use Sir Giles, and it's incredibly powerful against the Benoshi and Fuzzico archetypes right now, because all 3 of those rely on building a board presence and then using their charge power, or, in the case of Giles, just building a deck around the theme of the charge power. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you win the game, but he is a wild child body. He is a 2/2 for 2, and he actually does fit well as a target for Benoshi or as a sacrifice for Benoshi, which is one of my favorite archetypes. Following up with that, the rest of the pack is fairly okay, but going over the commons real quick, Royal Herald and Ridge Raider are cool cards if you already want them. You kind of want to be in humans before you take Royal Herald. You don't take Royal Herald as a reason to go humans. Construct Foreman and Construction Plans Crank Rocket always love to sit in a pack together, chilling out, making you regret taking one and not wheeling the other, so I always feel super bad. But when you get both, it's the best day. Feeding the Young Ones is strong removal. It gives you, at the very worst case, a 5-cost action that gives you 2 blockers and deals 2 damage to target troop. I love Feeding the Young Ones. Probably going to be my second pick here. For the same reasons that Matt took a Construction Plans for the Crank Rocket, I just like Feeding the Young Ones quite a bit. I'm going to try to shy away from the Crank Rocket and the Construct Foreman here because they're in the same pack, and I generally just try to avoid them in that case. Let somebody else fight over them. Manti Ranger is a 4/2 Spell Shield Crush Troop, is fantastic in Blood Wild Benoshi because a single sacrifice can make it... First of all, it's a safe target to sacrifice onto because it has Spell Shield, so very rarely will your opponent have a way to react to that. and then you get a Tyrannosaurus Hex. You get a 6/4 Crush with the bonus of Spell Shield at that point. Not a lot of things in the set have 4 attacks, so you probably trade with 2 things if you do lose it, or alternatively, you use a combat trick or a second sacrifice to make a much larger troop out of it, you know, an 8/6 Crush, which is hilariously good. Molten Slaggard's easy to disregard. Cottontail Scout is a wild child that tunnels for 1 and has some potential. And Crackling Boon, an overtime bot, I'm going to totally overlook. Born to Die, not an uncommon that I take for any sort of reason. It's very hard to set that up to work well. If you already have a deck that you want Born to Die in, you'll know about it. And while Mike and Matt took the Queensguard, I don't necessarily love it. It's a fantastic 1-drop, same as Keeper of the Wounded Petal. Like, you feel really good putting it down on turn 1, 2, or 3. And then every turn past that, you're just kind of losing a little bit of value. It adds to your shards. It's super cool, but I don't know if I would take it over that Manti Ranger. So I think I can take the Manti Ranger instead. So, Subtle Striker first, Feeding the Young Ones second, Manti Ranger third.
I partially expected Matt to pick the Subtle Striker first since he was being wrecked by it before, but he practiced restraint.
I really appreciate Penta bringing it up, because in my Blood Sapphire deck, I run Subtle Striker and I run Benoshi, and it's really good dropping him on 2 and then dropping any other troop on 3, probably a Darkspire or something, with a shard, getting that 3rd charge, and then killing that thing to make him a 4/4 that's shutting down your opponent's charge power, swinging in for 4 on 3. It's power move. I do it all the time. It's a great pick. I don't disagree with it. And I think Penta picked it number 1, not number 2.
So you're picking that for number 3?
Am I picking that for number 3?
Yeah. Yeah, third pick.
Yeah, I'm picking that for number 3.
Okay. That's probably fair then. So my second pick is going to be the Crank Rocket, just because it's solid removal and you get a lot of options to recur it later on, especially if you get the Recovery Specialist coming around to you. I think the Subtle Striker is a fine card and I don't mind getting it, but it's not something that gets me... It's a fine card. I'm happy to have it. It's not something that I want to pick over either the Queensguard or the Construction Plans Crank Rocket. Partly just because these other cards can lead to some nice synergistic picks later on, while the Subtle Striker is great in Blood, and I'm happy with it. I'm kind of trailing off in there. What I mean to say is mostly just that it doesn't allow me to go for an archetype that I'm happy to win with most of the time. While Blood Wild is a fine archetype, I don't prefer it as one of my top choices. So for my third pick, is there something in here that calls out to me more than that card? I don't think so. I mean, Penta already did a decent rundown on everything that's happening. I think the competition for the Subtle Striker is going to be maybe the Construct Foreman, though I feel kind of weird about picking it if I don't see another artifact strong card like Construction Plans or the other things that are in the print run with the Construct Foreman. So yeah, I'm picking the Subtle Striker as my third pick here. Just seeing a lone Construct Foreman means that there's some other probably good Dwarf cards that have been picked here, though that kind of analysis has led me astray where I think Dwarves are not an option for me, and then all of a sudden I'm flooded with Dwarves later in the game. So yeah, that's my third pick. I guess we all agree that Subtle Striker eventually gets picked from this pack, whether or not we're drafting. Matt, do you have any final thoughts before we conclude the episode?
No, I'm super happy with the entire tournament scene that we have going on in Hex right now. With 2 weekends a month being devoted to tournaments, the HexTechs Open and the Shard Cup tournaments that are playing. It's at a point where I sometimes, like last month, I had to pick which of the tournaments I was actually going to play in because there was a lot of stuff going on in Hex, and that's awesome. And I hope that, as Hex itself starts adding in more and more stuff, the Frostring Arena is apparently very close. If you can read the tea leaves. And then, after that comes out, there's going to be, more stuff. There's, Corey talked about a big, huge tournament at some point, with a large prize attached to it. And so, I just hope that the community-run tournaments don't get lost in the noise, and I think that especially with the Shard Cup stuff and all the awesome sponsors that we have, kind of raising the visibility of that tournament, it's making it definitely a place to be, especially if Colin's ponying up some hard cold cash for prizes.
Penta, your final thoughts?
Well, it's exciting, like Matt said, that the constructed and community scene is evolving. It would be fantastic to see the community-driven events fall into better and better placement as Hex goes along. Like, it certainly is going to be a huge deal when we can run the Sapphire Cup as a limited tournament. I'm sure you agree, Mike.
Of course.
It'll be fantastic when very simple stuff like 2 out of 3 in the Proving Grounds becomes available.
Soon, so not this patch.
Yeah, soon, not this patch. Yeah, and I'm not actually saying this, just in case anyone's reading this wrong. I'm not saying that as like I can't believe it doesn't exist yet. I understand that that's not a priority phase for their development right now. It's just not. They're working on creating a game that will make money so that they can create the perfect game, not necessarily fine-tuning tiny little things for 100, 200 player run community tournaments right now. So I just look forward to this going down the road, and I had a lot of fun shoutcasting the Ruby Cup. Like, the overall theme of this podcast was the Ruby Cup. I had a great time shoutcasting it. I hope you guys enjoyed. The people that did actually tune in and watch enjoyed that. And as a heads up, most of the commentary and matches should be going up onto our YouTubes pretty soon, so that's pretty exciting.
When I was able to tune in, I certainly enjoyed it, when my head was not buried in the client. Well then, my name has been Michael Allen. You can find me in game as Zubrin, and on Twitch and Twitter as Zubrin_alpha. Nicholas Pedrowski's Pentachills on Twitch, Twitter, and in-game, and Matt Miller's MMO designer in most places, but deck of many things in-game. Our sound engineer for this episode is Mark Elysian and Dozy. For any updates on us streaming when we post a show or other happenings in the Hex community, follow us on Twitter at 2 Turns Ahead, or leave a comment in the show's post at 2turnsahead.com. 5shards.com, on Reddit, or even email us at 2turnsahead@gmail.com. Finally, if you want automatic updates, please subscribe to us on iTunes. And if you feel inclined, give us a positive rating on the iTunes store. Rating this podcast will give other viewers a better chance of discovering the podcast on iTunes and help us grow the Hex community. Sorry, Elysian, if I screwed up your name. Thanks for listening.
Stay lucky.
Spoiler alert, Primal Drafts on the test server.
No! Stay lucky is the last word they will hear.
I get the last word.
Except they might hear Mark Jones. Actually, Mark, just edit in yourself saying something here. How do we pronounce your name?
Saying my name is not that difficult, guys. It sounds a little bit French. It's Marc Duché.
That's exactly how I pronounce it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's